Steve Dinham talks about the long wave of change to education, and tsunami comprises waves with very long wavelengths, and often these go unnoticed until it is too late to do anything about them, and when they reach land, great devastation can result. He's talking about privatisation, commercialisation. It's happening before people even notice it. But I want to just, before I completely drag people down, because there were some very positive comments that people made around the tables. No union has ever won a campaign based on pessimism and negativity, because that just leads to cynicism and division, and it saps people's political strength. The first thing we've got to do in this campaign is believe it is winnable. And then we fight. We don't drag ourselves down on it. But some of the issues that were raised today was the notion of how do you combat choice and competition? How do you encounter it? And they're very difficult concepts, because we are born to the notion of the supermarket, and the bigger the supermarket and the choice on the shelves, the better it is. But when you look at it in terms of an educational context, choice, school choice, well, in reality, not one single parent has ever chosen a school. The school chooses the student. The choice is made by the school, not by the parent. The only choice a parent makes is whether they can apply for enrolment. The ultimate decision, that is the choice, is made by the school. So when you're talking about school choice, you're talking about schools choosing, not parents. And when you're talking about competition, well, competition comes from the sport, as did the term league tables. And competition is about winners and losers. And I want to know, in the context of education outcomes being driven up by choice and competition, who are the losers? Because I certainly know who the winners are going to be. There was talk about the speed at which this is happening and how secret and underhanded governments are. Well, the trade agreements, of course, are designed to do that. In the paper that I talked about, If We Forget History, I talk about the notion that we're seriously living in very anti-democratic, not so much undemocratic, but anti-democratic times, that these agendas are much larger than just national governments. You know, you've got corporations now involved that have their annual turnover is larger than the gross domestic product of many European countries. Enormously powerful. And so therefore it's not just a matter of changing government, it's about changing ideas and using the kind of people power to do it. People talked about the issues of importing failed experiments, and that's what they are. The testing agendas, so much of this have been failed agendas, so keeping people informed about what's happened overseas is particularly important, and relating it to what's happening in your school, getting the information out. Someone talked about an assessment tool that's being used in New Zealand schools. Is a Pearson product in very small print down the bottom, and you've probably seen it yourselves. We know that in Australia, if I could just do the comparison on that very issue, the National Assessment writing task, that is the kids got to write a story, and then it's marked to see what their literacy level's like in their writing. It's being proposed by the National Curriculum Authority in Australia that the children's writing will be marked by a computer, not by adults anymore. And they're trying to trial that in 2017 for implementation in 2018. Just think of the implications. And they say we can train computers to value what we want in writing. We train the computers. And they're seriously talking about it, and they're developing it. And one of the 4 companies tendering for the contract to provide the software that can mark students' writing, apparently, is Pearson. And guess what the Pearson trial showed the government? Their product works perfectly. They're accurate every single time they mark a child's writing. We know what'll happen. It'll narrow the kind of writing. I'll finish on this point. This came up at one of the tables at the back. Your fight about funding is now your central fight against privatisation. That's not a side parallel issue. This is not another struggle you have to engage in my opinion. You're engaging in it when you engage in funding, because let's work out exactly how they privatise. Under neoliberal theory, a public enterprise, by its very existence, is bad. It's bureaucratic, it's slow, slothful, overstaffed, inefficient, and therefore the examples of a public enterprise that is successful offends neoliberal ideology. So what do? They can deliberately underfund a public enterprise, like they did the Sydney ferries. They sacked the marine engineers who were actually fixing the Sydney ferries. The ferries broke down, because they weren't being serviced. And then what did the government say? Inefficient. We'll privatise it. And now the marine engineers are all being employed by the private companies on about 70% of the salary before. So you can see your campaign to get funding into schools will be an important bulwark against privatisation, because you will get funding that you know in your heart of hearts will improve student outcomes and prove the worth of public enterprise. So that is a central campaign that you're engaging in. And so that question is, how do we relate this to teachers in the schools? Related to the issues you're fighting now, don't think it's got to be a whole new, brand new narrative. You've already got the narrative already.